Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Aleph of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 91. So the Daf begins, really it's talking about, let's say like this. It begins talking about the opinions of Rabbi Meir, the Chachamim, and Reb Shimon about carrying between roofs and chatzers and karpafs, and then it really gets into goes a little bit deeper into the opinion of Rabbi Shimon specifically. Chevre, let's go weiter. We will begin on Daf Tzadi Amud Beis. 3 lines from the bottom. Amr Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda Kshetim Tzalomar L'Divrei Rab Meir. So you can say, Kilu, if you look into Rab Meir's opinion, you will conclude that Gagan reshus la'atzman, Chatzeres reshus la'atzman, Karpefos reshus la'atzman, that according to Rabbi Meir, basically it goes like this. Roofs are their own thing, right? Rabbi Meir says that Reuven can carry onto Shimon's roof, no problem. Now, right, so you can carry from one roof to another. He'll also say that you can carry from one chatzer to another chatzer. This is, of course, without an Eruv, because if there was an Eruv, obviously you can carry from one chatzar to another. So even without an Eruv, you can carry from one chatzar to another chatzar. And the same would apply to karpaf. So you can carry from one karpaf to another karpaf, but they don't mix. Okay? You can't carry from a roof to a chatzar. You can't carry from a chatzar to a karpaf. You can carry to its own type, but not between them. Now listen to this. This is interesting. You may not have thought this, but Chachamim, the Divrei Chachamim, according to the Chachamim, Gagan v'chatzeres reshus achas, Karpefos reshus achas. So, according to the Chachamim, roofs and chatzers are one reshus and karpafs are one reshus. So meaning, we know, of course, that the opinion of the Chachamim is that each roof is its own chatzer, is its own reshus, right? So you can't carry from Reuven's roof to Shimon's roof. However, you would be able to carry from a roof to a chatzer. And you would not be allowed to carry from a chatzar to a karpaf, right? So we say that. So according to the Chacham, we're going to see Dafka Brisa on Tzadi Aleph Mud Beis that kind of shows this. But the Chacham's opinion is that even though you can't carry from Reuven's roof to Shimon's roof, you would be able to carry from your roof to your chatzar, even though there's lots of different houses that open up into the chatzar. That would be okay. So a roof and a chatzar are one reshus. But a karpaf is its own thing. You can't carry between a chatzar and a karpaf. The divrei Reb Shimon, kulan reshus achas hein. Now, according to Reb Shimon, they're all one reshus. So Reb Shimon has no problem carrying from a roof to a chatzar to a karpaf. That's no problem. Tanakavase de Rav. Tanakavase de Rav Yehuda. Now says the Gemara, we have a brisa supporting Rav, and we have a brisa supporting Rav Yehuda. What about Rav? Rav had said 2 days ago that according to the Chachamim, who say that you cannot carry from Reuven's roof to Shimon's roof, Rav says that and even within Reuven's own roof, Reuven can only carry Daled Amas. So the Gemara says that we actually have a brisa to support Rav in that. And we also have a brisa to support Rav Yehuda, specifically Rav Yehuda's opinion of Reb Shimon, that you can carry from a gag to a chatzar to a karpaf. Chevre, let's see what these are. So again, Tani Kavase de Rav, Tani Kavase de Rav Yehuda. We have a brisa supporting Rav. We have a brisa supporting Rav Yehuda. Tani Kavase de Rav. The brisa supporting Rav is Kol Gago Sa'ir Reshus Achas Hein. All of the roofs of the city are one reshus. Okay, we're going to see that this is Reb Meir's opinion. Now you're not allowed to take something from a chatzar to a roof or from a roof to a chatzar. Fine. Now, things that were in a chatzer when Shabbos began, you can move them around in the chatzer, right? So, meaning even if you don't have an Eruv, so meaning an Eruv would allow you to carry from your house into the chatzer, but even without an Eruv, you can pick up as long as the item that you're picking up was in the chatzer when Shabbos began, you can carry it as much as you want in your chatzer. And not only that, according to Meir, you can even take it to the next chatzer. That would also be acceptable. Bigagen mutter letaltalan. Wait, did I? 1 second. Bigagen mutter letaltalan begagen. Right? Anything that was on a roof when Shabbos began, so you can move it anywhere on that roof, right? Even between Reuven and Shimon's roofs would be no problem, according to Reb Meir. Right, so as long as no roof is higher or lower than the other by 10 tefachim, right? We said that according to Reb Meir, that would be a problem. But as long as they're all on the same level, that would be acceptable. Now, here's the important part. V'chachamim omrim, say the chachamim, kol echad ve'echad reshus la'atzmo ve'emitaslim bo ela b'dalad amis, that according to the chachamim, each roof, Reuven's roof, Shimon's roof, is its own reshus. You cannot carry from Reuven's roof to Shimon's roof. Not only that, even Reuven on his own roof can only carry Daled Amos. This is a brisa, and that is supporting Rab, who says just that even Reuven on his own roof can only carry Daled Amos and no more. That was, of course, as opposed to Shmuel's opinion, which is that you'd be allowed, Reuven can carry anywhere on his roof. Tana Kavasa to Rav Yehuda. Now we also have a brisa supporting Rav Yehuda, specifically that Rav Yehuda said that according to Reb Shimon, you can carry between a gag, karpaf, chotzer. Amar Rebbe, Chevra, this was a Gemara that we saw in Gemara Shabbos and Daf Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, that Sheinu Lomdim Torah Eitzel Reb Shimon ben Tkoa, says Rebbe that when we were studying Torah by Reb Shimon ben Yochai in Tkoa, and as Rabbi Yisrael pointed out at the time, that this is not the Tkoa near Jerusalem. This is the Tekoa. Apparently there was a Tekoa in the north, which makes sense because Reb Shimon was in the north. So it says Rebbe that when we were learning Torah with Reb Shimon in the north, in Tekoa, we would take on Shabbos, we would take oil and towels, migag legag, from roof to roof, migag lechotzer, from roofs to courtyards, mechotzer lechotzer, from courtyards to other courtyards, mechotzer lekarpaf, mekarpaf lekarpaf acher, ad sheinu magin eitzel ha'ma'ayon, sheinu rochtzim bo, until we would arrive at the stream that we were bathing in, right? So, what Rebbe is saying is that on Shabbos, when we were studying with Reb Shimon, so we would utilize roofs, karpafs, chotzers, and all sorts of combinations, to get the items that we wanted to take with us to the stream. Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda Maisa b'shas hasakane, that there was a story during a dangerous time. V'ayinu mailin sefer Torah mechotzer legag umegag lechotzer mechotzer lekarpaf likrosbo. Rabbi Yehuda says that there was a dangerous time that we would carry a sefer Torah on Shabbos from a courtyard to a roof, from a roof to a courtyard, from a courtyard to a karpaf. Right? Also, all sorts of combinations in order to be able to read the Torah on Shabbos. Amrullah, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, Ein shas hasakana raya, you can't bring any proofs from a dangerous time. That's an exception to the rule. However, we see that in this brisa, it is supporting Rabbi Yehuda's notion that, according to Reb Shimon, you can, as Rebbe attested to, you can carry in all sorts of combinations between roofs and courtyards and karpafs. Chevet, we are now going to see a machlokas that we have seen before, that we saw. Where did we see this? Who could tell me? On Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, we saw this. It's about how to apply Reb Shimon's opinion about carrying between all sorts of different chotzers and gags and karpaf. So Amrulo, Ein Shas Hasakana Raya. No, we just read that. Reb Shimon Omer Echad Gagan V'chule. Right? So we have Reb Shimon's opinion. Amr Rav, says Rav, Alacha Reb Shimon. So Rav says that Alacha is like Reb Shimon. V'shelo ervu. But that's as long as they didn't make an eruv in the chotzer. Aval ervu lo. But if they did make an eruv, then the Alacha is not like Reb Shimon. The Gazrinan Dilma Asila Afuke Money the bottom the chotzer, because we're concerned that people might take out items from the house into the chotzer, right? So Reb Shimon says that you're allowed to carry from roofs to chotzers to karpafs, no problem. Now, Rav says that we paskin like that. You can carry between roofs and chotzers and karpafs, no problem. However, says Rav, we can only paskin like Reb Shimon in cases where there was no eruv in the chotzer. Because if there's no eruv in the chotzer, well then we can assume that nobody's taking anything from the house into the chotzer, which means that anything in the chotzer must have been there when Shabbos began, and for that reason, you can carry between roofs and karpafs and chotzers. However, if they made an eruv in the chotzer, well then you're allowed to carry things in and out of your house into the chotzer, and therefore there's no guarantee that the item that you're taking from one chotzer to a roof, let's say, it's quite possible that that item, when Shabbos began, was actually inside one of the houses, and somebody brought that from the house into the chotzer, and now you're taking it from a house into a chotzer to a roof, for example. That would not be allowed. and therefore to prevent people from taking things from a house into some other, by way of the chotzer, into, let's say, a roof or another chotzer or a karpaf. To prevent that, Rav says that we can only paskin like Reb Shimon when there's no Eruv in the chotzer, and then we can assume that everything in the chotzer was there when Shabbos began. However, if there is an Eruv in the chotzer, out of concern that maybe you're going to take things from the house into the chotzer, and then from the chotzer to some other chotzer or roof or karpaf, to prevent that, Rav says that we only paskin like Reb Shimon when there's no Eruv in the chotzer. U'Shmuel Amar, Bein Ervu, Bein Shelo Ervu. Shmuel says, meh, we're not concerned. Whether there is a Eruv in the chotzer, whether there's no Eruv in the chotzer, it doesn't matter. We could still paskin like Reb Shimon, and you can carry between roofs and chotzers and karpafs. V'cheinam Rabbi Yochanan, and similarly Rabbi Yochanan said, Milachoshcha. Who whispered to you, Rav, to tell you that Reb Shimon's opinion would only paskin like Reb Shimon when there is no Eruv? Bein Ervu uvein Shelo Ervu. We can paskin like Reb Shimon whether they made an Eruv or not. Maskifla Rav Chizda l'Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Chizda asks a question against Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. Yomu shnei kelim b'chotzer achas ze muter v'ze aser. But they're going to say that, what's the deal? You have two items in the same chotzer. One of them is muter, one of them is aser. One of them you're allowed to take to another place, one of them you're not. Like, they're both in the same chotzer, right? It makes things confusing. So, Reb Shimon the Taimei Delo Gazer. But the Gemara answers for Shmuel and Reb Yochanan that, what do you want from us? Right? This is Reb Shimon's opinion. And I'll prove it to you that Reb Shimon is not concerned about taking things from places that you're not allowed to, right? Or, putting things in places that you're not allowed to, right? Ditnan, as we learn in a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah from Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis. Baruch Hashem, it's very nice that already lots of these items that were, complicated at the time that we learned them, we're having, I don't want to jinx myself, but a lot of these complicated things that are coming up now are really things that we've already gone through the hard work of understanding the first time we saw them. So, they're less complicated now. But anyways, we're going to prove right now that Reb Shimon is not concerned about taking items to places where you're not allowed to, from the following Mishnah that we learned on Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis. Titnan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Reb Shimon l'ma'adavar domeh, says Reb Shimon, what is this similar to? L'shalosh chatzeres apsuches zolazo uvsuches reshus harabim, to three chatzers that are lined up one next to each other, and they're all open one to the other. They're also open into reshus harabim. i.e. they're not dependent on each other in any way. Ve'ervu shtei achitzonis ma'emtzayis, and the two outer chatzers made an eruv with the inner chatzer. Hi muteris imoyen ve'hein mutaros ima. So the middle chatzer is allowed to carry things in and out of the two outer chatzers, and the two outer chatzers are allowed to carry things in and out of the middle chatzer. Uvez achitzonis asurin zo imzo. However, the two outer chatzers cannot carry to each other, right? So the two outer chatzers had made an eruv with the middle chatzer, and we're saying that the middle chatzer can take things in and out of the outer chatzers. The outer chatzers can take things in and out of the middle chatzer. However, people who live in, outer chatzer, let's call it A, would be unable to take something from their house through the middle chatzer into the chatzer C, because they never made an eruv with each other. They only made an eruv with the middle one. So they wouldn't be able to carry from, one outer chatzer to another outer chatzer. But here's the thing. Even though you wouldn't be allowed to take something from, let's say, Chatzar A to Chatzar C, we have no problem saying that you're allowed to take something from Chatzar A to Chatzar B, and we're not concerned that, then you might end up taking it from Chatzar A to Chatzar C. So here also, right, Reb Shimon is not, right, so we're going to argue and we're going to answer for Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan that, yeah, sure, you're not allowed to take something from your house by way of the Chatzar into, let's say, another Chatzar. Sure, that wouldn't be allowed. But we're not necessarily going to, say that, you're not allowed to take something from one chutzner to the other chutzner out of concern that you might take something from the house into the chutzner, into another chutzner. Just like Reb Shimon isn't concerned about it by the three chutzers that are next to each other and the two outer ones made Erev with the middle one, he's also not going to be concerned about it here. And therefore we could paskin like Reb Shimon and say that you can carry from a chutzner to a karpaf, to a gag, even when the people in the chutzner made an Erev. So lo gazar dilma asila fuke mane do hachatzer lachatzer hachanami lo gazrinan dilma asila fuke mane debatim lechatzer. So just like in the case of the three chatzers that were next to each other, right? He didn't make a gzera dilma asila fuke mane do hachatzer lachatzer, right? Reb Shimon wasn't concerned that you might take something from chatzer A to chatzer C. Hachanami. So here also by passing like Reb Shimon lo gazrinan. We're not concerned that you might take items from a house into the chatzar and then into like either a gag or a chatzar or a karpaf. Mosiv Rav Sheshes now asks a kasha against Rav, who says that we only pass like Reb Shimon when there's no chatzar, when there's no eruv. Reb Shimon Omer echad gagos, echad chatzeres, ve'echad karpefes. That Reb Shimon says that roofs and chutzers and karpafs, reshus achasein lechelim sheshavsu besochan, it's only considered one reshus for kelim that that were in the chutzer when Shabbos began. Velo lekelim sheshavsu besochan bayis, but not to any items that may have been inside a house when Shabbos began. Now, yamad bishlama de ervu. So I understand if we're talking about that Reb Shimon is saying that you're allowed to move things from a gag to a chutzner to a karpaf, even in a situation where they made an eruv. Hainu demishkachasla mane debatim b'chutzner. That, well, in that case, that's why we had to say that that Reb Shimon's opinion is only for things that were in the chutzner when Shabbos began, meaning they made an eruv, and therefore you're allowed to take things in and out of your house to the chutzner, and therefore we have to make a distinction and say that we can only take things from a gag to chutzner to a karpaf if the item that you're taking was in the chutzner when Shabbos began, but not one of the items that you may have taken from your house into the chutzner. But if we're saying that Reb Shimon's opinion is only when they did not make an eruv, well then well then, how could we possibly be talking about and making a distinction between things that were in the chutzner when Shabbos began and things that were inside of the house when Shabbos began? If they didn't make an eruv, how are things going to get from the house to the chutzner? So it must be that they made an eruv, and still that is where Reb Shimon's saying that you're allowed to carry things that were in the chutzner when Shabbos began from a chutzner to a chutzner, karpaf, gag. So, but nonetheless, who most of the mefarik la. Rav Sheshes asked the question against Rav, but he also answered the question, and you can say that the chotzer that they davka did not make an eruv. So bechumta v'sudra, that even if they didn't make an eruv, still, what if you like took your clothing, right? You were wearing something in your house, and then you brought it out to the chotzer while you were wearing it, and then you removed it. So that is how you could, even without an eruv, you can potentially take something from inside of the house into the chutzner, and you could say that Davka Reb Shimon's opinion is only when they did not make an eruv. Ta shma, come in here, anshe chutzner, anshe mirpeses. Oh, so if you have a people who live in a chutzner, you got a bunch of houses that open up into a chutzner, right? Let's say you have a building, and a 2-story building. The bottom floor has a bunch of apartments. The second floor has a bunch of apartments. Now, on the second floor, there's also like a big patio, right, mirpeset, that all the second-story apartments open up into, right? So you have anshe chotzer, anshe mirpeses. You have people in the chatzer. You also have people on the second story, on that patio. Sheshachachu v'lo ervu, and they didn't make an eruv, right? Now, they had made their own eruv, right? The people in the chutzner made an eruv, the people on the mirpeset made an eruv, but they didn't make an eruv together, one big eruv. So kol shegavoa yud tvachim the mirpeses, anything that is 10 tvachim tall is going to be the shaykh to the second story mirpeset. Pachos mikan, if it's less than 10 tvachim l'chutzner, well then it's the chutzers, as Rashi points us out, it's, as we learned the other day, it's even to the chutzner. Seder. Bamed dvar mamurim, When do we say this? Shahayu elu sharabim ve'elu sharabim. That is talking about specifically when there were a whole bunch of apartments that open up into the Chatzar and a whole bunch of apartments that open up into the Merpeset. Ve'ervu elu la'atzman ve'elu la'atzman. And, the Chatzar made an Eruv, the Merpeset made an Eruv, but they didn't make one big joint Eruv. O shahayu shal yechidim. Or there was one person who lived on the second story and one person who lived in the Chatzar. She'ein tzrichin la'ariv. That in order to carry on the Merpeset or to carry in the Chatzar, they don't need to make an Eruv. Aval hayu shel rabim v'shachachu v'lo ervu. But if it belonged to many people and they didn't make an Eruv whatsoever, so then Gag v'chatzar v'achsadja u'merpeses kulan reshus achas hein. Well, then the roof and the Chatzar and the portico and the porch, the second story, kulan reshus achas hein, then they are all one reshus. So what do we see? Time of lo eruv. We just said specifically that if they did not make an eruv at all, well then it's all considered one reshus, right? The second story, the Chatzar, ha eruv. But if they did make an eruv, lo, well then it would not all be considered one reshus. So we see that it's a support for Rav. The Rav says that according to Reb Shimon, it's only if they did not make an eruv. If they make an eruv, so then you wouldn't be able to carry between them. So Amani Rabbanan, so the Gemara answer is no. This brisa is specifically the opinion of the rabbis. That the rabbis say that if they did not make an eruv at all, so then you'd be able to carry between a gag and a chatzar and a karpaf and a merpeses. No, not a karpaf. A gag, a chatzar, and a chsaj and a merpeses. Dekanami tlokatani karpaf umavush mamina. And we see specifically the chacham excluded a karpaf and a mavui, and therefore that's the giveaway that this is the opinion of the rabbis. Because if it was Reb Shimon, he would include a karpaf and a mavui. So therefore, this brisa is the opinion of the rabbis. It's not a proof either way for Reb Shimon's opinion in terms of does he require no eruv or not. Tashma Kominir Chamesh Chatzeres Apsuchis Zo Lazo Upsuchis Lemavui. So if you have 5 chatzers lined up one after the other, and they all open up into one mavui, okay? V'shachachu kulam v'lo ervu, and they all forgot, and no eruvs were made bichlal. Osur lahachnis u'lohotzi michatzer lemavui. Well, then you can't make any. You can't take things. Right, so you have 5 chatzers in a row. They're open to the mavui and they're also open to one another, right? But there were no eruvs made bichlal. So asur la'achnis u'lohotzi mechatzer lemavui. So you can't take anything from the chatzar into the mavui. Umin ha'mavui l'chatzar. You can't take anything from the mavui into the chatzar. V'chelim sheshavsu b'chatzar mutar l'tatzal b'chatzar. And any items that were in the chatzar when Shabbos began, so then you can carry them in the chatzar. There's no problem with that. Uv'mavui also, but you wouldn't be allowed to do this in the mavui. Okay, so things that were in the mavui when Shabbos began, you wouldn't be allowed to move them in the mavui. Okay, we're going to explain that in a minute, or maybe a few minutes. Reb Shimon matir. Reb Shimon says it's no problem. You would be allowed to take things from the chatzar to the mavui, and vice versa. Shai Reb Shimon Omer, because Reb Shimon would say, "Kozman shin sharabim," that as long as these chatzers belong to multiple people, multiple houses, v'shachachu v'lo ervu, and they didn't make an eruv, well then gag v'chatzar v'achsajim merpeses v'karpaf u'mavui kulan reshus achas hein, they're all considered one reshus. So what do we see? Time of the lo ervu. Reb Shimon seems to be saying explicitly that the reason why they're allowed to carry between the chatzar and the mavui is because there was no eruv. Ha ervu lo. But if they would have made an eruv, then you would be unable to carry from a chatzar to the mavui. So it's a support for Rav. So lo, the Gemara says no. My lo ervu. What does it mean lo ervu? Lo ervu chatzeres ba'de adade. No, what it means is that the chatzers, they're open to each other and they didn't make an eruv together. Ha chatzar uvatim ervu, but the houses in the chatzar did make an eruv, and even so, you could still carry from a chatzar to a mavui, and we're not concerned that maybe you're going to take something that was in a house when Shabbos began. Okay, fine. Valo ervu katani, but what do you mean? It says that they specifically didn't make an eruv. So my lo ervu, what does it mean that they didn't make an eruv? Means lo nishtatfu. They didn't do a shitufei mevos, but they made an eruv chatzeres. Or if you want to say, Reb Shimon or you could say that, you know what, Reb Shimon is talking about where they didn't make an eruv bichlal. There was no eruv. But don't conclude from there that Reb Shimon's opinion is only when they did not make an eruv, because the divrei d'Rabban ka'amar, he was just answering to the rabbis according to their opinion, right? Meaning, he was saying, L'didi, lo shna erev lo shna lo erev. He says, look, listen, to me, it really makes no difference if they made an erev or not. You're allowed to carry between a chatzar and a mavui. El didchu, but according to you, that it does matter whether or not they made an erev. Well, odu li mias, at least admit to me, de lo erevu, that at least where they didn't make an erev, reshus achasi, that you can carry between a chatzar and a mavui. V'amrulei, and they said to him, Rabbanon, lo, shtei reshuyasein. They disagree and they say, no, even when they didn't make an eruv, you would still be unable to carry between the chatzar and the mavui. We said earlier, mavui aser, that in the mavui it's aser, right? That you'd be unable to carry items that when Shabbos began were in the mavui. You cannot carry them in the mavui. So let's say that this supports Reb Zera in the name of Rav. The Amar Reb Zera, Amar Rav, mavui shelo nishtatvu bo, that if you have a mavui that they did not do a shitufei mevos, you can only carry dalet amos. Oh, there you go. That sounds perfect, right? Mavui no shitufei mevos. You can only carry dalet amos. Sounds like exactly what we're saying. So the Gemara says, "Ema ulim mavui aser." No, so don't say that that bimavui, that in the mavui it's aser to carry. It means li mavui it's aser to carry. Meaning, if you have items that were not in the mavui when Shabbos began, well then you would be unable to take them into the mavui. Okay? Hainu reisha, but that we already said that in the reisha, that you're not allowed to carry between the mavui and the chatzar to the mavui. So Mishni Yisera, it's Trichale. The Gemara says no. Even though we said it in the reisha, we needed to say it again in the seifa, because I would have thought to say Ki Pligi Rabbanon Ali Du Reb Shimon Hanimili Heicha De Ervu, because I may have said that, like the Gemara wanted to say a minute ago, that maybe the rabbis would only disagree with Reb Shimon when it comes to where they made an eruv, but where there was no eruv, maybe the Chacham would agree with Reb Shimon that you can carry from the chatzar to the mavui, kamash malan. That is why we had to repeat that you cannot carry from the chatzar to the mavui, that even when they did not make an eruv, you still may not carry from the chatzar to the mavui, but it is not necessarily saying that you would be unable to carry things within the mavui. Okay, fine. Meaning things that were in the mavui when Shabbos began, you could argue that you would be able to carry them within the mavui. That was Daf Tzadi Aleph of Masechta Ayruvin. So the first part we kind of went into the opinions of Reb Meir, the Chachamim, and Reb Shimon, and we said that according to Reb Meir, you can carry from roof to roof, you can carry from chatzar to chatzar, you can carry from karpaf to karpaf, but not between them. The Rabbanan said that you can carry between a roof and a chatzar, interestingly, but just not between a roof, a chatzar, and a karpaf. Right? The karpaf you can't carry between the chatzar and the karpaf. Reb Shimon says they're all interchangeable. You can carry from a roof to a chatzar to a karpaf and back again, no problem. Then we got into where, Reb Shimon's opinion. So we had the opinions of Rav, Shmuel, and Reb Yochanan. They all say that we paskin like Reb Shimon. However, Rav says that's only when there was no eruv in the chatzar. But if there's an eruv in the chatzar, then we have to be concerned that maybe you're going to carry things from the house into the chatzar and then into another chatzar or gag or karpaf. Whereas Shmuel and Reb Yochanan are not concerned. Okay, then we tried to bring proofs either way for Rav, for Shmuel, and Reb Yochanan, and that was basically the rest of the daf. Chaver, peace.